Doreen Valiente is a witch, and she believes that witchcraft should never be approached lightly.
The amount of silly dabbling in the occult that goes on today scares me. These people think that they're doing something terribly clever and terribly with it, and it's all great fun. And what they don't understand is that they're invoking forces which they can't fathom, and they're making themselves a channel by which those forces can come through into the world.
The revival of public interest in witchcraft is one of those curious features of life today. But it's very difficult to get at the truth of what it's all about. On one estimate, there are 30,000 people practicing in witchcraft in this country alone. A more conservative figure would be 8,000. But even so, it's enough to make you think. Are there really dangers involved? Or is it all just a delusion? And if it is just a delusion, why do so many really quite intelligent people half believe in it? Just what has been going on in this country since the last of the witchcraft laws was repealed in 1951?
Witches certainly hit the headlines, often in conflict with the church. Our investigation in the end has led us to some pretty nasty evidence of blackmail, if not of black magic. But not all witches are ill-intentioned. One may pass them in the street without knowing it. They don't wear pointed hats and ride broomsticks. They look very like the rest of us and do the sort of jobs that we do.
I'm a secretary.
Well, I'm a restorer. I work in antiques in Portobello.
Oh, I've just left school. I haven't started yet.
Well, I do spray painting most of the time.
Well, at the moment I work in a boutique, but I've been trained in the arts.
I'm a tower crane driver.
What first drew them to witchcraft?
Well, I've been interested in witchcraft since I was 10. I got into it through fairy stories and things like that.
Coming from Africa, I suppose I've always had a basic interest in magic and witchcraft, and that when I came to England, I just sort of made a purposeful search for it, you know.
The word witch originally means wise one, and this is what people try to aspire to be. They try to learn the wisdom of nature. They try to learn the meaning behind things.
Molly Moncrief, lecturer in occult subjects.
I had to work and learn it the hard way by checking my findings with all the ancient writers on the occult from time immemorial. And I found that it tallies, it always does.
I'd say to a person who really wanted to know what was the spirit of witchcraft, that they'll learn more by, say, going out on the downs at midnight and listening to the wind in the trees and looking at the full moon. They'll learn more of the spirit of witchcraft, the real spirit of witchcraft, in that way than they will by reading any amount of books. We believe in the horned god and in the goddess of the moon. Now, this doesn't mean that we're silly enough to think that the moon in the sky is a goddess. I don't think any educated pagan ever did think like that. But what this means to us is the masculine and feminine powers of nature. They are symbols, magical images, and by means of our imagination, we can make a real contact with these cosmic forces, the forces of nature, the forces of life.
And in a wood at midnight, on the night of the full moon, Doreen Valiente carried out her ritual, hoping that in this experiment, never before tried in front of cameras, some psychic manifestations might appear on the film.
Diana of the rounded moon, the queen of all enchantments here, the wind is crying through the trees, and we invoke thee to appear.
In fact, no such manifestations did appear. And this is Mrs. Valiente's final comment.
Well, it was very difficult to get the spirit of the old ritual, knowing that you were surrounded by cameras and technicians and things like that. But when the ritual was almost at an end, I began to feel the atmosphere building up, and I think other people did too. This is what the ritual really means. It isn't conjuring up a sort of pantomime demon or anything like that. It is something which affects your inner mind and works itself out in your life and in your feeling and thought. To the old ones, merry meet, merry part.
Witches often claim to put their powers to more specific use. Mrs. Eleanor Bone.
And we believe if we set our minds on a thing, we're going to get it. You know, Paracelsus said that the beginning of all magical operations is determined imagination. And this is what we set out to do. Get a mental picture of the thing we wish to achieve, and in that way concentrate on getting it.
And she and her coven concentrate mainly on the healing of the sick. She is herself a registered nurse.
Now, the work we're going to do tonight is for a friend of mine, Helena. She's recently had a slipped disc and she's still suffering with a lot of pain in her back. Now, when we concentrate at the end, I want you to picture her cycling around the country lanes on her bicycle, you know, full of energy and full of life and really fit and well again. When we dance round chanting, we start slowly and we get quicker and quicker. Now, doing this, we're releasing a great deal of energy. At the same time, the chanting is setting up vibrations.
Eco, eco, arida. Eco, eco, azara. Eco, eco, donala. Eco, eco, ganina.
Without clothes, we're all equal. We came into the world with nothing, and so we're working that way. Of course, it's putting aside all worldly things in a purely spiritual act of worship.
Alex Sanders is another witch, well known on television, who initiated his wife, Maxine.
Blessed be thy womb, without which we would not be. Blessed be thy breast formed in beauty. Blessed be thy lips that shall not say.
They also claim to use their power these days exclusively for good, or it may rebound upon them adversely.
At the moment I'm connected with research for a cancer cure with a very famous professor from Munich.
My first experience was with my mother. She was suffering from cancer of the throat, and Alex was visiting us, and he said, all right, we'll see what we can do about it. And we switched the light off and sat there for about 10 minutes in silence. And what appeared to be a ball of fire went across the room towards my mother. And later she said she experienced a feeling of being tilted backwards. But she got frightened and stopped it. But that was the first experience of physical fire, of being able to see it.
I have various spirits who help me with the work. The particular spirit who is helping me with the professor and with the cancer work is Michael, who is, I suppose, my familiar spirit. He helps me, been helping me now for 5-6 years, very reliable.
The result of this cancer experiment is still to be published. But the view that today's suburban witches are the direct descendants of the witches who perished here and in Europe during the great witch persecutions is disputed by Keith Thomas, the historian and author of Religion and the Decline of Magic, who blames it all on a Scottish lady anthropologist, Miss Margaret Murray.
I can say in all candor that there is no basis for that view, but her views have been very influential, and they can be found in debased form on every station bookstall in the land. And so these suburban ladies and gentlemen who are acting out these fantasies are no doubt getting a good deal of healthy exercise, but I don't think they've got anything at all to do with the witches of the 16th and 17th centuries.
Yet, it was the claim of these earlier witches to contact the spirits and effect miraculous cures, which had brought them, like their modern counterparts, into collision with the Church. Though the Church in the Middle Ages was in the curious position of condemning witchcraft, when it was virtually in the business itself.
The medieval Church had an elaborate repertoire of benedictions and consecrations designed to drive away evil spirits and give protection against fevers and floods and dangers of all kinds. And there were amulets, of course, for the individual Christian to wear. In addition, a great number of superstitions surrounded the sacraments of the Church, in particular the miracle of the Mass. It was thought that a communicant who didn't swallow the bread but took it away in his mouth was in possession of a really impressive source of magical power. The Church also proclaimed the existence of a devil and his attendant demons who were, so to speak, in rivalry to Christ and his saints. But the Church said that they had holy water and the sign of the cross and exorcism which would drive away demons and give protection against them. Any miraculous effect achieved without the Church's sanction was witchcraft, because it must somehow or other have involved the aid of the devil. The effect of the Reformation was to reaffirm the reality of the devil and evil spirits and witchcraft, but to say that the Church's repertoire of protection was useless, that the sign of the cross and exorcism were powerless and indeed superstitious. In other words, the Protestants disarmed themselves in face of the old enemy. They also forbade counter-magic, popular charms against witches, and so they left the imaginary victim of witchcraft with no alternative but to prosecute the witch in the law courts. As far as the white witches are concerned, persecution was continuous and pretty ineffective, because I suppose there were probably as many white witches in 16th century England as there were parochial clergymen. As far as the black maleficent witches are concerned, we don't quite know, because not all the records of the assizes survive. The usual estimate which is made is that perhaps 1,000 witches were executed.
This is said to be the skeleton of one of the witches of St. Osyth, executed at Chelmsford on July the 5th, 1589. Her body was nailed down to prevent her rising from the dead. Historically, the distinction between different kinds of witches, white and black, good and bad, has always been important.
First of all, there were the village wizards, the wise men, cunning women, healers, charmers, fortune tellers, who performed services for their clients, often for a fee, who helped them and were therefore, on the whole, rather popular in the villages, and were regarded as white witches, and indeed often used some of the Church's prayers as part of their ritual.
These survive in country districts to this day. Theo Brown, a research fellow in British folklore, prefers to call them charmers.
From Minehead down to Bodmin Moor, I've known about 17 charmers. It may be purely coincidental. They're nearly all men. They don't like reporters or anything like that. They usually talk very freely to me, surprisingly so. In fact, on one occasion, I went to see a charmer. I was a complete stranger to him. He invited me into his house, sat me down in his parlour, looked at me very hard, and said, "You can do it, can't you?"
William Painter is a Cornish bard, and his bardic name means searcher out of witchcraft.
Quite recently I gave a talk to some 60 children on Cornish folklore at the Liscard Secondary Modern School. And at the end of my talk, during the discussion and questions, I was amazed when 4 children, each in turn, one said, "My grandfather can charm warts. My grandfather can charm ringworms in cattle. My grandfather can stop the flow of blood when anyone's badly cut." And the 4th, "My grandfather can charm snakes."
I don't know exactly the procedure, except that they make a circle round the snake with an ash stick. And because of the formula of words they use, apparently, the snake cannot leave the circle. In fact, a man I met who has seen this done said the snake lashes round and round inside this invisible circle, is quite unable to break out of it.
Again, at one period, there was a great demand for charms in bags. And here is a charm I discovered in Cornwall, hanging over a mantelpiece. It is a charm against all terrors by night. It contains the wings of a bat.
The second category is black witchcraft.
The type, I suppose, we think of when a witch is mentioned, was the person who was suspected of having done harm to her neighbors by some supernatural means. The witch usually lived in the same village, and the most usual situation, I suppose, was that she'd come to the door to borrow some food or drink, or even to beg some money for some neighbor, to ask for some neighborly help, and the neighbor had simply slammed the door in her face. A few days later, something goes wrong in the household, a child is taken ill, somebody dies, the pigs are sick, and they turn around and blame the witch.
I think in the old days, people very often did put a curse on someone that worked, because you see, people were very much wronged, perhaps by, say, the local squire turned them out of their home and they had no redress at law or something like that. No human law could do anything for them. And when a person was really wronged and cursed someone from the marrow of their bones, believing in every word of it, then that sort of curse with justice behind it did work.
Nor are maleficent witches unknown today.
I recently heard of a grey witch who blighted a neighbour's cattle over the hill, and a bishop went and remonstrated with her about this. He asked her, "Are you responsible for this?" And she said, "Oh yes." Openly boasted about this.
People often had their cattle ill-wished, bewitched, overlooked, and they were told to take the heart of the animal that had met with a mysterious end, pierce it with nails and pins and horseshoe nails, and put it in a chimney, and all would be well.
But even in rural witchcraft, all wasn't always well.
In 1945, on the slopes of Meehan Hill, an event took place which brought witchcraft into the national dailies. A particularly gruesome murder was committed, which soon became known as the Witchcraft Murder. A hedge cutter in his 70s, his name was Charles Walton, was murdered on the 14th of February, St. Valentine's Day. He was battered to death with a stick, and he was pinned to the ground with his own pitchfork, which was thrust on either side of his neck, through the neck. A sign of the cross was cut on his chest with his own billhook.
One of the most remarkable features about the case was the seriousness with which the police treated the whole witchcraft theory. No less a person than Fabian of the Yard was called in to investigate it, and the police soon turned up some very curious pieces of local information. St. Valentine's Day in 1945 fell on Ash Wednesday, a day particularly rich in black magic associations. It was the day when the Druids were reported to have made sacrifice to the earth. They killed their victim with a knife and allowed his blood to drain away, to replenish the fertility of the soil. Charles Walton's case aroused the interest of Margaret Murray, the celebrated Egyptologist and archaeologist. She was then in her 90s, but she came down to the village to stay there and investigate the case personally. And she said that she was 95% certain that the killing was a witchcraft killing, that Walton had been murdered to replenish the earth. Well, why should this possibly be so?
the theory that came out was that Walton himself was a witch, and he'd made barren the local land. The crops had been bad, they'd been late, and they hadn't really been very fruitful. He is said to have tied a toy plough to the leg of a pet toad and sent it scurrying across the local fields. In 1875, in Long Compton, a village only a little way away, an old woman had been killed under exactly the same circumstances. A pitchfork had been thrust into her throat, and the young man who did the crime confessed later in court that he had done it to rid the village of witchcraft.
This is a photo of old Walton, and his case demonstrates just how elusive witchcraft can be to the investigator.
With me now is the person who knew him most and best, his niece, Mrs. Good. Mrs. Good, Charles Walton was living with you at the time of the murder.
Yes.
Do you think that there was any chance that witchcraft played any part in his death at all?
No. I think the papers made a lot of it. And I lived with him all my life, and I've never known such things. I think it's ridiculous, really, the things that were said.
What did you think about the theories in the newspapers?
And, what the paper said was very disturbing, because none of it was true.
Warwickshire is supposed to have been one of the great centres of witchcraft. Did you ever meet a witch or know anything about witchcraft?
No, never. I've never heard of it. I never remember them talking about witchcraft till this came along.
Coincidence can account for many things, and the easy explanation is often avoided. The vicar of Laniste in Cornwall, the Reverend R.F.G. Pierce, had this to say.
One Sunday I noticed that the church candles seemed to be burning down rather quickly, so I made a mark on them. The following Sunday I noticed that they had burnt down even more, so I went along to the police and said that I thought perhaps somebody was using the church during the week. I said that we would arrange to have the church locked, and to my amazement I saw a report in the newspaper the next day, "Vicar asks police to solve altar candles mystery." For myself, I don't think that there is anything to do with witchcraft in the matter, although that was suggested in the report, because I think that witchcraft is the manipulation of one person by another. More probably it was a vagrant who was seeking shelter in the church.
But dating from ancient Babylon, there has been a third type of practitioner, considered to be even more sinister.
The intellectual wizard, the man who tried to get in touch with the spirit world by an elaborate ritual of conjuration, drawing circles and lighting candles and hallowing and so on. This was, as I say, a rather intellectual thing to do. It was very popular at the universities, and I suppose from the point of view of Jacobean undergraduates was rather the counterpart of modern drug-taking as the stock student temptation.
Take the case of the notorious Sir Francis Dashwood, who founded the Hellfire Club in the caves below West Wickham.
It's difficult at this distance of time to know how much genuine Satanism played a part in their practices. It was rumoured that Dashwood and his companions had celebrated Black Mass both here and at Medmenham Abbey. Dashwood himself was an intensely religious man in some ways, and it was rumoured that there was a secret passage leading from the caves down here to the church on top of the hill, and that Dashwood's parson worshipped God above and Satan down here. On one occasion, the devil did in fact put in a personal appearance. He leapt across the table and seized Lord Sandwich by the throat. Sandwich collapsed in a nervous fit. The devil turned out to be an ape, equipped with false horns and a little black cloak. He'd been introduced into the assembly by John Wilkes. So it seems that among all their Satanism, there was a certain amount of jesting too.
But not everyone has taken it as a jest. For many, Satanism promises a shortcut, a guarantee of power and pleasure in this world, and its adherents seriously believe that a demon or emissary of Satan can be called down to do their will. The myth of Satan and his human servants continues to the present day. This is the Church of Satan at San Francisco, where Anton LaVey, the high priest, says, "Live is evil spelt backwards." He therefore reverses everything in the Gospels. Hate your enemies, he says, and if someone smites you, smash him.
Hail Satan! Hail Satan!
Behold, saith Satan, I have a circle on whose hands stand the 12 kingdoms. 6 are the seats of living breath, the rest are as sharp sickles or the horns of death.
The actress, Jane Mansfield, was a participant in the rituals of his church. When she tried to break away, she met a violent death in a car crash soon afterwards. Many believed that the accident was controlled by LaVey's psychic power. And when Charles Manson and his satanic family were found guilty of horrible ritual murders, the public realized that the gap between fantasy and practice had narrowed alarmingly. Also, it's been coming nearer home. The desecration of this cemetery at Basingstoke last Easter could, of course, have been the work of hooligans. But since it seemed to require such frenetic energy, Satanists cannot be ruled out. Captain Barry Irons, Church Army Youth Counsellor in Birmingham, could scarcely believe in this day and age what he found to be happening.
I'm told by a large number, and I do mean a large number of young people who've come to see me, that very often the first time they have been taken to a party where witchcraft has been involved, they have been initiated, which largely means, of course, that they're laid on the altar and the sacred signs are made on their body with animal's blood. They do, of course, drink animal's blood too as part of the ceremony.
Daphne Reeves, a nurse, was once a member of a black magic group.
Well, I was working in London at the time, and I was sharing a flat with 3 other people, and 2 of them one night said, would you like to come to a meeting with us? I'm sure you'll find it interesting. And I did so. And it turned out to be a meeting of people who were practicing black magic. At first I was just an observer. It was very interesting, and I felt that I could perhaps learn something. I gradually became more and more involved.
The things I find the most horrifying, of course, are the vows which they're expected to take. And these are the things which hold people, of course, to the group long afterwards. One of the vows is, of course, first of all, that you promise to forward the work of our Lord Satan, Lord of Earth. The second thing is, of course, you vow to be loyal to the Abuddon, who is the leader of the coven. Another thing is that you must break the faith of a Christian. And this is interesting because a large number of the young people have been once members of the Christian church. And you do take a vow, which is a trophy, in fact, to break the faith of a Christian. And the last one, which is even more frightening and horrifying, that you will get a man of influence or responsibility into a compromising situation. And this largely means sexual activity, where through the photography and the taping of what goes on in a prearranged room, there is a hold on that person for blackmail, and in some sinister way, it is possible for certain people to have a hold on some of the decision-making of this country through such things as blackmail and witchcraft. There are many other practices, but I think these are the most horrifying. Now, this sounds a little bit unusual. It could be taken by many people as just not being on, but I'm afraid it is on. And once you start taking part in this as a young person, all this can be very mentally upsetting.
I became aware of the intensity of my thought, which could be very evil and very effective.
If you read old books and you imitate occult practices and you seek after the devil, there is a way in which you begin to think evil and be evil.
At Boscastle in Cornwall, on the quay where the witches used to whistle up the wind, there is a witch house full of curious objects, including a tableau depicting the Black Mass. Its owner is Cecil Hugh Williamson, who gives his own account of what goes on behind the scenes of a seemingly innocuous organization.
Today, we have got this very sound and practical system, which after all is the basis of all spy systems, and any Russian person running an intelligence service or German or French would recognize it at once. You've got the cell system, where the cell works, but it has its link man. So, you can imagine this scene. As a local coven of a district has its meetings every once in a while, and so what happens is that you find a group of people making tracks to the meeting place, but they don't all drive there and arrive and fill up a car park. No, for secrecy and security, what they'll do is they'll go in their Austin 1000s or what have you, and will gather at, if there's a lot of them, they may use 2 pubs, so that you have no more than 5, 6, 8 people meeting at a pub at the end of the thing. They'll leave some of the cars there and go off in 1 or 2 cars, and they will then drive off to this country house or maybe a farmhouse. And in appearances, it's exactly what it is, a pleasant house, living in the country, possibly retired people, nicely kept gardens, cars will drive up. Any locals will say, oh, well, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so are having a little cocktail party and get together. Eventually one of the people will come and say, well, quieten down, everybody, he's arrived. By the word he, they refer, of course, to the man in black, the coven leader. Now, the coven leaders sometimes is seen, but very rarely these days. The system is practically the same everywhere, is that there's a door which is left open and leading into the room where the guests are assembled. People quieten down, shade the lights down a little bit to a quiet light, and a runner, which is the man in black's secretary or scribe, will make all the arrangements. He's like a major domo. And the major thing which they do is that when the preliminaries are done, they start about the business in hand today. Ever since the dawn of time, there have always been people that want things. They want somebody else's wife, they want health, they want youth, they want this, that, and the other. And the witch, as the word witchcraft says, they are in trade. It's a business. You pays your money and you gets a result for it. And so with the witchcraft business and all the witches, they've always referred to their customers as wanters, because that is exactly what it is. If you can't get it in the shop down the street, if the law doesn't provide it for you, well, then you go to the witch.
I did a magic ritual in reverse, and within a year I owned a 26-roomed house. Within 2 years I was worth £250,000. Within 5 years I'd gone through nearly £750,000 by the use of black magic.
How do you join? Oh, that's probably the most common question that I'm asked. All sorts of people are dead keen to become witches and join witchcraft covens. Well, the short answer to that is you don't join. The witches select their replacements very, very carefully, and anybody with a little bit of common sense who sits down and gives it a little bit of thought will see why. After all, you're going into a most exclusive organization whose work, mostly for their wanters, is beyond the law. In fact, let's be blunt about it. You join a witchcraft coven and you may, are almost certain to at some time, be a murderer or murderess.
The reason that I drew away from it was because the first person to help me with the ritual was my sister. She was involved with me in a shooting incident.
There are times in this world when people have said it, often in best of families, he'd be better off if he was dead. That little sentence, if you think about it, is not an isolated or a rare thing. It's all too common. There are many, many women and men up and down the countryside who loathe and detest people. And they are the people who go to the witches and ask for that very useful, expensive, and practical service, elimination.
I think a black magician like I was, if I'd gone on much further, I probably would have started to use human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, then human sacrifice, and probably degenerated and maybe committed suicide or been executed for murder, or whatever the penalty is for taking human life. Nowadays I try not so much to have a guilt complex about it, but try to make amends.
Once they try to come out of the group, tremendous pressures are put upon them. They don't let them go very easily. They know where they're working, for instance. They know where they're living. They even know who their boyfriend or girlfriend is.
I had been a member for 5 years, and the road back, I don't think anybody should underestimate how very difficult it is, you know, to do this.
Nasty notes pinned to a jacket, a note put on your typewriter, a cat's heart or testicles found in your jacket pocket, all these things which break down your moral resistance. A person standing outside the gates of your factory asking you to come to another party or telling you when the next large meeting of the witches is. The offering you of drugs, because largely you will have an appetite for certain soft drugs. The other thing is that it seems, and I cannot understand how it works, that they do seem to be able to know what each other are thinking. There is a kind of a telepathy, a thought wave from the abundant to the person. I can't understand this. I still find it hard to believe.
Their power is great, and they have a very long arm, and I think that I don't think one can experience this and come away unscathed. I think something is bound to be left. You're bound to have scars.
How do they eliminate a person? Well, broadly speaking, there are two methods. One is that you use the practical things which are already on this earth. By that I mean you can poison a person or such like things. On the other, which is more interesting and actually the one they prefer to use, you make use of the spirit forces. Now that may sound a very tall order to you, but it comes in the category of mesmerizing a person, influencing their mind and controlling them. I'll give you an example. Shall we say there's a wife wants to get rid of a awkward, we use the word caddish husband, a blackguard. Well, he works in some place like most people. He has a car, probably on the way home he has a drink with the boys. And so the witch, having once received her commission, will get one of her runners to watch all his movements, and she finds that he goes into the Black Dog at such and such a time, and he has a drink there, and then he drives home, or he goes off to the house of his mistress or what have you. So the procedure is quite simple, is that arrangements are made for the witch to go to the pub, and she will be in the bar there, be quite close to the target, as you might say, and she can either speak to him direct, get to know him, or she can actually do it with her back turned to him. And what she does is she gives her particular spirit, and I ask you to believe this because when you're talking about witchcraft you do step into the world beyond, which the average person knows very little about, but it's so real. And she will instruct this spirit force to latch onto this fellow, and the instructions to it are very simple. She just says, make this man go to sleep in 15 minutes, or half an hour, whatever it may be, knowing full well that he'll finish his drink up, and he'll go out to the car park and get in his car and start to drive home, and he will black out.
Well, a lot of young people don't believe there is a power when they get involved in satanic or black magic practices. They go for the drugs, they go for the fun of it, they go for the adventure. But many young people, although they don't believe it at first, by involving themselves in occult practices and satanic worship, they open themselves to spirit possession.
Well, really, it's the power of the church in reverse. Very powerful, very frightening.
And since the Reformation, the Church's use of exorcism has been creeping back. The Bishop of Exeter set up a study group to look into it. John Richards was the secretary.
Our study group and its findings have made quite clear that there is a great difference between the mentally sick and those whose illness is primarily spiritual. We have on our study group doctors and psychiatrists. The New Testament view of demonic possession, in my experience in recent years, I've had to now come to accept this. The manner of Christian exorcism is very varied. It could be done quite informally and extemporally.
The first one took place on a Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock after I'd invited a young girl who had been a witch for about 4 years to come and see me. The day before I had found out a lot about her. I found that she had rejected the Christian faith. She had now a satanic name. She was an Ephonite, which is a kind of a second order witch. and she had taken the vows and was very guilt-ridden about all that she had done, and she wanted help. I found also she had taken drugs. I found a lot about her family, and I was pretty convinced that she was possessed of something which was evil, and I felt compelled to do something for the girl. And what I did for her, I've done for many others since, in fact over 142. And she begins to say, "What are you doing to me?" And I say, "I don't know what I'm doing to you, but I think I'm blocking the Abaddon insofar as I'm picking up something of what he's trying to say to you." And while the girl is in this almost state of transit, it is very important then to make contact with her. And I always kneel down by the person and put my hands on her hands, which of course she pulls away, but I hold them.
I think the best and the only real antidote is prayer. It is a very powerful weapon, as these people themselves realize, of course, and are frightened of.
And as I say the Lord's Prayer, nothing seems to happen until I come to "and lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil." And when that happens, I'm frightened to death in many cases, because by this time the girl is pulling away and saying, "No, no, no." And at the same time, I'm very, very hot or cold, and my heart is really bumping very fast, and the whole room seems to be alive. And as soon as I said the Lord's Prayer, I then say, by the authority given to me in the Lord Jesus Christ, I command the powers of evil within you to cease, and I give you back your Christian name. And then I give the girl her Christian names as they used to be, and I sign you with the sign of the cross in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. And it's a great act of triumph, you know. But the other thing is, it's never over there, because the person always leaps up into the air and has a kind of an epileptic fit, or runs down the stairs and collapses. And the horrifying thing is that they're very often unconscious for nearly half an hour. But the beautiful thing is, when they awake, it's over. It is really over.
I bind all evil forces and all evil influences, so that they never more disturb, distort the soul of thy servant Frank. But that he may
Here is another exorcist, the Reverend Christopher Neil Smith, at work on the case of an American who felt that he had been bewitched.
And of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. Let all witchcraft, sorcerer, and black magic fly from hence.
A man believes that his mother, when she was pregnant, was given a witchcraft potion.
And I exorcise thee, every unclean spirit, by the true God, the living God, the holy God, that they may never more hold tyranny over thy soul, and give place to Christ, his power, his pardon, and his peace. The blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost be upon you and remain with you this day and always.
The man said afterwards, it was as if 1,000-pound weight had been lifted from his shoulders.
What then are we to conclude? Are witchcraft beliefs basically of the same order as Christian beliefs? Or are the witches practicing the oldest religion in the world, inheritors of a fertility cult dating back to man's first days on earth? Is there really a supernatural witchcraft power, something basic to the human race, which the modern world has lost? Or is it all self-delusion, hysteria, a kind of madness stemming from man's confused understanding of himself? Freud said of demons, "We speak as if they invade us from the outside, but demons are our bad desires, which have been repressed." Here is Irene Champagnat, a Jungian psychotherapist.
Well, I'm very dubious about the word witch. could mean anything. I mean, sometimes people call me a witch if I have a hunch about something that's going to happen or something that they didn't think I knew, which is just purely an intuitive woman.
Everybody's born with power. I think it's if they have the awareness. I think everybody can use this power, but they have to be aware of it or want to use it.
I think there's really a feeling that there's a mysterious, spiritual side to life that can't be explained in scientific terms, and that they really are on the search for God, really. And I have a great respect for them, but in the search for God, they've tumbled on the devil quite often. And he gets in through the collective, just in the same way as God can get through the collective.
Well, when I was a child, I always felt much closer to a great life force when I was out of doors, far closer than when I was in the four walls of any church.
Well, the thing that makes people turn to witchcraft is primarily they're dissatisfied with their religions. They're looking for something. I suppose they're looking for evidence more than anything else, spiritual evidence, psychic forces.
The point about witchcraft is that it's a self-confirming system. If you believe in it, nothing can happen to weaken that belief. If I believe that magical healers can cure me and go to a magical healer, well, if I recover, then I've been cured. If I don't recover, then I go to another healer. And if he can't cure me either, then it must mean that I'm bewitched, and so on it goes.
Much depends on what the healing process is, and nobody seems to know very much about that. What I'm quite certain is it's nothing whatever to do with magic.
I have had some experience in another country where witchcraft was supposed to be rampant, but it did seem to me that it was a psychological thing, and that if the people had not been told that they had been bewitched, nothing would have happened.
Well, I should say avoid certain kinds of groups. Certain kinds of groups. Of course, I know people are lonely, and they want to get together, and they want to share radically at a deep level. And this is what starts it. And they want to be real, these encounter groups. But I would say to them, still stick to your very simple practicalities. Just the ordinary human life and human personal relationships.
Anyone who sets out to play God with other people's lives, I think, is doing something very wrong and very foolish.
When I look back on those 5 years and realise just how very evil they were, I hope I never go back.
I would never go back on the black path again. I've still got money in the bank from those days, over £137,000. I will never touch it.
The danger at the moment is that many young people have rejected the Christian God and are seeking out old gods which are false, which are dangerous, and really will resort to their own ruination.
Once you're in, you've sold your soul.